Chapter 1. The Day Everything Stopped Making Sense. My name is William, and the day I discovered why incompetent people rule the world started with the most frustrating meeting of my career. It was a grey Tuesday morning in Boston when I watched my company promote Derek Thompson to Vice President of Operations. Derek, the same guy who couldn't operate a coffee machine without help, who had nearly bankrupted our last 3 major projects, and who thought synergy was just a fancy word you sprinkled into presentations like seasoning. I sat in that conference room, watching Derek beam with pride as our CEO praised his visionary leadership and decisive management style, while I, the person who had quietly fixed every one of Derek's disasters, remained stuck in my senior analyst position. "This doesn't make sense," I whispered to my colleague Sarah, who just shrugged with the resigned look of someone who'd seen this movie too many times. But what really broke my brain wasn't just Derek's promotion. It was watching how the room responded to him when Derek spoke, spouting obvious nonsense about leveraging our core competencies to optimize stakeholder value. People nodded like he was delivering the Gettysburg Address. When I tried to point out actual problems with our strategy, citing real data and proven methods, I got polite smiles and quick topic changes. How could someone so obviously incompetent inspire such confidence? How could intelligence and competence be so consistently overlooked in favor of whatever Derek represented? That evening, I found myself in my usual coffee shop near MIT, staring at my laptop but unable to focus on work. My mind kept circling back to the same question. Why do the least qualified people always seem to end up in charge? That's when I noticed the older man at the table next to mine reading a worn copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. He was taking careful notes, occasionally chuckling to himself like he was reading a particularly dark comedy. "Rough day at the office?" he asked, apparently noticing my 1,000-yard stare. "You could say that," I replied. "Just watched the most incompetent person I know get promoted to VP." He set down his book and smiled knowingly. "Ah, you've discovered one of humanity's oldest paradoxes. Mind if I ask what made him incompetent?" I launched into Derek's greatest hits: the failed product launches, the budget overruns, the strategic blunders. But as I talked, the stranger, who introduced himself as Dr. Peter Den, an organizational psychologist who'd spent decades studying leadership, just nodded like he'd heard this exact story 1,000 times. "William," he said when I finished, "what you witnessed today wasn't an accident or a mistake. It was the predictable result of psychological forces that Niccolo Machiavelli understood 500 years ago. The question is, do you want to understand them too?" Chapter 2. The Prince's Cruel Logic. Dr. Den invited me to join him, and what followed was the most eye-opening conversation of my life. "Let me guess," he said, pulling out a small notebook. "Derek is confident, decisive, and great at taking credit for other people's work. He speaks in simple, authoritative statements and never admits uncertainty. Am I close? Exactly. But how did you? Because Derek is following a playbook that's worked for thousands of years. Machiavelli wrote, 'Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are.' Derek has mastered the art of appearing competent without being competent." Dr. Den explained that my frustration was actually the result of what he called the competence paradox. In many environments, the qualities that make someone truly capable, thoughtfulness, humility, ethical considerations, actually work against them in competition for power. "Think about it," he continued. "When Derek makes a presentation, what does he do?" I reflected on Derek's style. He speaks with absolute certainty, makes bold promises, and never acknowledges potential problems or limitations. Exactly. Now think about how you present ideas that hit home. When I presented, I always included caveats, acknowledged uncertainties, and discussed potential risks. I thought I was being responsible and thorough. I shook my head, because highly intelligent people see complexity where others see simplicity. They acknowledge limitations where others make bold promises. They ask questions where others provide definitive answers. In environments where perception matters more than reality, these intellectual virtues become political liabilities. This was like discovering that gravity worked backwards. Everything I'd believed about merit and competence suddenly felt naive. But there's more, Dr. Den continued. Derek's incompetence isn't just overlooked, it's actually advantageous in certain ways. Have you noticed who he surrounds himself with? I thought about Derek's team, people even less capable than he is. Yes men and flatterers mostly, bingo. Machiavelli observed that weak leaders deliberately choose weaker subordinates to avoid threats to their authority. This creates what we call competence. Cascading incompetence flows downward through the organization like water, finding the lowest level. Dr. Den explained that this wasn't unique to my company. It was a pattern he'd observed across industries and cultures. In corporate America, Australia's political system, Canada's bureaucracy, and Britain's financial sector, the same dynamics played out repeatedly. So intelligent, capable people are doomed to be passed over forever? I asked, feeling defeated. Not at all, Dr. Den smiled. But first, you need to understand the psychological forces at work. Only then can you learn to navigate them wisely. Chapter 3: The Psychology of Deception. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Den and I met regularly. He introduced me to what he called the Machiavelli framework, a systematic understanding of how power actually works versus how we think it should work. Lesson 1: The Dunning-Kruger Advantage. Have you heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect? Dr. Den asked during our second meeting. When I shook my head, he explained, it's a cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge dramatically overestimate their competence, while genuine experts tend to underestimate theirs. He shared a case study from a tech company in Seattle. 2 candidates were being considered for a CEO position: Sarah, a seasoned engineer with deep technical knowledge, and Mike, a charismatic salesperson with superficial understanding of the technology. Sarah spoke carefully about the challenges ahead, the complexity of scaling their platform, and the risks they faced. Mike painted a vision of inevitable success and limitless growth. Guess who got the job? Mike, I said, already seeing the pattern. The board was seduced by Mike's confidence. Sarah's intellectual honesty was interpreted as weakness or lack of vision. The company failed within 2 years, but Mike had already moved on to his next opportunity. This explained so much about Derek's success. His ignorance wasn't a bug, it was a feature. It allowed him to make bold claims without being burdened by knowledge of why those claims might be problematic. Lesson 2: The Confidence Illusion. Dr. Den showed me research from Stanford University, demonstrating that confidence is often more persuasive than expertise. Our brains use mental shortcuts when evaluating others. Confidence signals competence, even when it doesn't correlate with actual ability. He told me about Adam Neumann of WeWork, whose supreme confidence attracted billions in investment despite a fundamentally flawed business model. Neumann wasn't successful because he was smart. He was successful because he projected absolute certainty in an uncertain world. This psychological shortcut made evolutionary sense, Dr. Den explained. In simple environments, confidence often did correlate with competence. But in our complex modern world, this mental shortcut could be easily exploited. Lesson 3. The moral handicap. This was the lesson that disturbed me most. Dr. Den explained that ethical considerations often handicap intelligent people in power competitions. Machiavelli wrote that a prince must learn how not to be good. He wasn't advocating immorality. He was observing that moral constraints limit your strategic options. Dr. Den shared examples from politics and business where ethical candidates lost to opponents willing to lie, manipulate, and exploit fears. It's not that good people can't win, he clarified, but they need to understand the game they're playing. This created what he called the integrity trap. Good people often lose, not because their ideas are worse, but because they're unwilling to use the tactics that win competitions for power. Chapter 4. The Laboratory of Life. Armed with this new understanding, I began observing my workplace with different eyes. It was like having X-ray vision for organizational dynamics. I noticed how Derek managed upward versus downward. With superiors, he was confident and decisive. With subordinates, he was often confused and relied heavily on others' expertise. But the superiors never saw the second version of Derek. I watched how he handled mistakes. When projects failed, Derek was masterful at shifting blame while taking credit for any successes. He'd say things like, "While we faced some unexpected challenges, my strategic vision ultimately guided us to valuable learnings." Most revealing was watching how he handled questions, where I would dive into details and acknowledge complexity. Derek would respond with phrases like, "That's exactly why we need strong leadership to cut through the noise and focus on what really matters." It was maddening, but also educational. Derek wasn't stupid. He was playing a different game than I was. I was focused on being right. He was focused on being persuasive. The first experiment. Dr. Den suggested I try a small experiment. In your next presentation, try presenting with more confidence and fewer caveats. See what happens. I was scheduled to present quarterly analysis to the executive team. Normally, I would have included extensive methodology notes, acknowledged data limitations, and presented multiple scenarios. Instead, I streamlined my presentation to focus on clear, confident conclusions. The response was immediate and shocking. Questions that usually derailed my presentations about methodology or alternative interpretations simply didn't come up. The executives nodded approvingly and praised my clear thinking and strategic insight. I felt like I was betraying my intellectual integrity, but I couldn't deny the results. The second experiment. Next, Dr. Den had me observe how different people were treated in meetings. Pay attention to who gets interrupted, whose ideas are built upon, and whose contributions are remembered later. The patterns were stark. Derek and other executives rarely got interrupted, even when they said ridiculous things. Meanwhile, thoughtful contributors were often cut off or had their ideas ignored, only to see the same ideas praised when repeated by someone with more authority. I realized that content mattered far less than context. The same idea presented by different people received completely different receptions. Chapter 5. The Strategic Awakening. 3 months into my education with Dr. Den, something clicked. I wasn't just learning about Machiavellian dynamics. I was learning to navigate them strategically. The goal isn't to become like Derek, Dr. Den emphasized. It's to understand the game well enough to change it from within. He introduced me to what he called ethical Machiavellianism, using understanding of power dynamics to advance worthy goals rather than selfish ones. Strategy 1. The Competence Translator. Instead of abandoning my analytical nature, I learned to translate complex insights into simple, confident statements, rather than saying, based on multiple regression analysis of historical data, there's approximately a 73% probability that this strategy will improve margins by 8 to 12% over 18 months. I would say this strategy will significantly improve our margins within the next year and a half. The underlying analysis remained the same, but the presentation became more persuasive. Strategy 2. The strategic alliance. I began building relationships with people who valued competence over charisma. I found allies in the finance department who appreciated rigorous analysis, in engineering teams who valued problem solving, and among clients who cared about results over presentation. These alliances became my power base, a network of people who could vouch for my actual competence when opportunities arose. Strategy 3. The competence demonstration. Instead of just talking about my capabilities, I began creating visible successes that were harder to ignore or steal. I volunteered for challenging projects, delivered measurable results, and made sure those results were connected to my name. When Derek tried to take credit for my work, I had documentation and witnesses ready. More importantly, I had built a reputation for delivery that made his claims less credible. Chapter 6. The Breakthrough. 6 months after that first conversation with Dr. Den, the opportunity I'd been preparing for arrived. Our company was facing a crisis. A major client was threatening to leave due to service failures, and the executive team was scrambling for solutions. Derek, true to form, called an emergency meeting and began proposing grandiose but impractical solutions. "We need to completely reimagine our service paradigm," he declared. "Think outside the box and leverage our synergistic capabilities." For once, I was ready. I had spent weeks quietly analyzing the client's complaints, developing a practical solution, and building support among key stakeholders. When Derek finished his presentation of buzzwords and empty promises, I stood up. "I appreciate Derek's vision," I began, "but our client needs immediate, concrete action. I've identified 3 specific operational changes that will address their concerns within 30 days. Instead of my usual detailed methodology, I presented clear problems and definitive solutions. Instead of acknowledging uncertainties, I expressed confidence in the approach. Instead of asking for questions, I outlined next steps. The room's energy shifted. The CEO leaned forward. "William, can you implement this?" "Absolutely. I've already begun preliminary work and can have initial results within 1 week." The turning point. My solution worked. Within 2 weeks, client satisfaction improved dramatically. Within a month, they expanded their contract. Within 2 months, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Operations, a position that had been created specifically for me. Derek, meanwhile, was quietly reassigned to a less critical role. His pattern of promises without delivery had finally caught up with him. But the most satisfying part wasn't my promotion. It was watching how the organizational culture began to shift. With someone competent in a leadership position, other capable people felt empowered to speak up and contribute. Chapter 7. The Deeper Understanding. A year after my promotion, Dr. Den and I reflected on the journey during one of our regular coffee meetings. "You've learned to play the game," he said, "but more importantly, you're changing the rules." He was right. In my new role, I had implemented several changes designed to reward competence over charisma. Performance metrics that measured actual results rather than just perception. Decision-making processes that required evidence and analysis. Team structures that gave voice to subject matter experts. communication standards that valued clarity over buzzwords. This is how real change happens, Dr. Den explained. Not by fighting the system directly, but by understanding it well enough to transform it from within. He shared examples from around the world of similar transformations. Singapore's civil service had built safeguards specifically designed to prevent confidence from trumping competence. Germany's corporate governance separated management from oversight to reduce the impact of charismatic but incompetent leaders. New Zealand's government transparency laws made it harder for leaders to hide incompetence behind complexity. The key insight Machiavelli offers, Dr. Den continued, is that different environments reward different qualities. Your job as a leader is to create an environment that rewards the qualities you want to see. Chapter 8. The Ripple Effect. 2 years after my transformation, the effects had spread far beyond my immediate sphere. Several people from my team had been promoted to leadership positions in other departments, taking with them the culture of competence over charisma. The company's overall performance had improved dramatically as decision-making became more evidence-based and less personality-driven. But the most meaningful change was personal. I had learned to navigate power dynamics without sacrificing my integrity. I could be strategic without being manipulative, confident without being arrogant, and politically savvy without being dishonest. I began mentoring others who faced similar challenges. James, a brilliant engineer who was being passed over for promotions, learned to present his technical insights in more accessible and confident ways. Maria, a data scientist whose careful analysis was being ignored, developed strategies for building credibility and influence. Each person I helped strengthened the network of competent professionals working to change organizational culture from within. The teaching moment. I'll never forget the day when a young analyst named David approached me, frustrated by watching an incompetent colleague get promoted ahead of him. "It doesn't make sense," he said, echoing my words from years earlier. How can someone so obviously incompetent inspire such confidence? I smiled, remembering Dr. Den's patient guidance, and invited David for coffee. It was time to pass on the lessons I had learned. Chapter 9. The Modern Machiavelli. 3 years into my journey, Dr. Den and I co-authored a research paper on ethical leadership in Machiavellian environments. Our work caught the attention of business schools and leadership development programs. We discovered that the principles we'd explored weren't just relevant to corporate environments. The same dynamics played out in politics, academia, non-profit organizations, and even social movements. The uncomfortable truth, Dr. Den explained during one of our speaking engagements, is that good intentions aren't enough. If you want to create positive change, you need to understand how power actually works, not how you wish it worked. We developed a framework for what we called constructive Machiavellianism, using understanding of power dynamics to advance ethical goals. Principle 1. Know the game. Understand the psychological and structural forces that determine who gains influence in your environment. Principle 2. Play strategically. Use this understanding to advance worthy goals without compromising your core values. Principle 3. Change the rules once you gain influence. Modify systems to reward competence and integrity rather than manipulation and charisma. Chapter 10. The Global Perspective. Our research took us around the world, studying how different cultures handled the relationship between competence and power. In Japan, we found that consensus-building cultures could still be manipulated by confident individuals who appeared to represent group thinking. In Australia, the tall poppy syndrome that supposedly cut down overconfident leaders often ended up punishing genuine competence instead. In Canada, Politeness norms sometimes prevented necessary challenges to incompetent authority. In the United Kingdom, class and accent could substitute for actual expertise in determining who was taken seriously. Each culture had its own vulnerabilities to the Machiavellian dynamic, but also its own strengths that could be leveraged to promote better leadership selection. The universal truth we discovered was that human psychology remains constant across cultures. We all use mental shortcuts to evaluate others, and those shortcuts can be exploited by those who understand them. Chapter 11: The Personal Transformation. 5 years after that first frustrating meeting, I found myself in a position I never could have imagined. I was the CEO of a consulting firm that specialized in helping organizations build cultures of competence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gained power by learning to navigate the very systems that typically reward incompetence. But I had used that power to create environments where merit truly mattered. Derek, meanwhile, had bounced between several companies, leaving a trail of failed projects and frustrated colleagues. His pattern of confident incompetence had finally caught up with him in an age where results could be tracked and verified more easily. But I felt no satisfaction in his struggles. If anything, I felt sympathy. Derek was playing the only game he knew how to play, in systems that rewarded his approach. The problem wasn't Derek personally. It was the systems that elevated people like him. The personal cost. The journey hadn't been without costs. Learning to be strategic about communication sometimes felt like betraying my natural inclination toward intellectual honesty. There were moments when I wondered if I was becoming too much like the people I had criticized. Dr. Den helped me work through these doubts. The question isn't whether you're changing, he said. The question is whether you're changing in service of your values or in opposition to them. That distinction became my North Star. I was willing to adapt my methods, but not my purposes. I would learn to communicate strategically, but I wouldn't abandon truth. I would build alliances politically, but I wouldn't sacrifice integrity. Chapter 12: The Lasting Lessons. As I write this story, sitting in the same coffee shop where I first met Dr. Den, I'm struck by how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. The fundamental dynamics Machiavelli identified 5 centuries ago are still operative today. People still prefer confident simplicity over uncertain complexity. Organizations still struggle with competence selection. Power still often flows to those who understand perception better than those who understand reality. But understanding these dynamics doesn't have to lead to cynicism or surrender. It can lead to wisdom and strategic action. The 3 pillars. Through my journey, I learned that effective leadership in complex environments rests on 3 pillars. Competence, developing real skills and knowledge that create genuine value. Communication, learning to present competence in ways that others can recognize and appreciate. Character, maintaining integrity while navigating political realities. Too many people focus on only one pillar. Technical experts develop competence but neglect communication. Natural leaders master communication but lack substance. Idealists maintain character but ignore political realities. The most effective leaders integrate all 3. Epilogue: The continuing journey. Dr. Den retired last year, but our friendship and collaboration continue. He often jokes that he created a monster, a Machiavellian who uses his powers for good. But the real victory isn't personal success. It's the dozens of organizations we've helped transform, the hundreds of competent professionals we've helped advance, and the thousands of people who now work in environments where merit truly matters. The consulting firm I lead has become a laboratory for testing new approaches to leadership development and organizational design. we've documented how small changes in hiring practices, promotion criteria, and communication norms can dramatically shift organizational culture. Our clients range from Fortune 500 companies to government agencies to non-profit organizations. The common thread is a commitment to creating systems that reward competence, encourage intellectual honesty, and resist manipulation. The next generation, perhaps most importantly, we're working to educate the next generation of leaders. Business schools are beginning to include courses on applied political psychology and ethical influence. Young professionals are learning to recognize Machiavellian dynamics and respond strategically rather than naively. David, the young analyst I mentored years ago, now runs his own department and has become one of our most effective advocates for competence-based leadership. The ripple effects continue to spread. The eternal vigilance. But I've learned that this work is never finished. Each generation must discover these truths anew. Each organization must actively resist the gravitational pull toward incompetent leadership. Each individual must choose between the easy path of manipulation and the harder path of earned influence. Machiavelli's insights remain relevant because they describe unchanging aspects of human nature. As long as humans use mental shortcuts to evaluate others, as long as confidence appears more attractive than uncertainty, as long as simple answers feel more comfortable than complex truths, the dynamics he described will persist. The question isn't whether these forces will exist, it's whether we'll understand them well enough to channel them toward worthy ends. The final lesson. If there's one lesson I want readers to take from this story, it's this. Understanding how power works isn't about becoming manipulative or cynical. It's about becoming effective in service of your values. The world needs competent, ethical people in positions of influence, but competence and ethics alone aren't enough. You also need wisdom about human psychology and strategic thinking about organizational dynamics. Machiavelli wrote, "Since love and fear can hardly exist together, if we must choose between them, it is far safer to be feared than loved." But I would add, it's far better to be respected for competence than feared for power or loved for charisma. Respect based on demonstrated competence is the most stable foundation for ethical leadership. It can't be faked indefinitely. It tends to attract other competent people, and it creates environments where truth and merit can flourish. The fool's crown may glitter in the moment, but it's the crown of competence that wears well over time. To anyone reading this who has ever felt frustrated by watching incompetent people gain power while capable individuals are overlooked, you're not imagining things. You're not alone, and you're not powerless. Understanding the game is the first step toward changing it. The journey from naive idealism to strategic wisdom isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. The world needs leaders who combine Machiavellian understanding with ethical purpose. Perhaps that leader is you.